Great to see everybody. We are looking at a new aspect that we are kind of untapped right now on the tourism side of things. And we have a guest here that I think everybody's just about met, other than a few staff members. I'll turn it over to him, but we're looking kind of at a true destination marketing organization or a Kenyan visitor bureau. Right now our chamber does a little bit of the Visit Kenyan aspect, but this would just kind of go to the next level and take it to what it is. So a lot of the stuff that Shane's going to go over, we're not really doing. It's not anything's broken. It's just it's not something we've been doing. And so we've really not tapped into this. The closest CBBs we've got around are Amarillo has one, and Plainview has one, and so does Logan. And I think there may be a few others in the Panhandle, but those are the three main ones that are even regionally close to us. Today, our whole goal is to help educate and learn, and like y'all, I'm learning some myself. I've never experienced CBB aspect. I know about it. I don't know the complete inner workings of it all. But ultimately, it's tourism and aggressive marketing to help bring people to town to put them in our hotels. And that's what it is. Putting Kenyan, Texas as a destination. Everybody in this room believes that Kenyan, Texas is a destination spot. I don't think there's anybody in here who disagrees with that, staff or commission. How do we take that and make it more than what it is now? Getting people to come. Outer Kenyan, hometown, Kenyan, Texas. Not Amarillo, Kenyan, Texas. Texas musical drama. Hometown, Kenyan, Texas. Panhandle Plains Historical Museum. Hometown, Kenyan, Texas. West Texas A&M. Hometown, Kenyan, Texas. We've got a lot of great destinations. Main Street, the Square, I can go on and on. More than a lot of cities have. We really want to continue to take the next level. As many of y'all know, we've been knee deep in bringing a new hotel in town. WT went out and solicited RFPs for that. The hotel is going to break ground any day now. That hotel will be twice the size of any other hotel in town. It'll be the biggest hotel in town. And that'll add to more of our space that we needed. And I think we're probably even looking at, we probably need a second hotel, to be honest. As I texted all of y'all, Friday, or I think Saturday night, there wasn't a hotel room in the city. That's good. Things are moving back. John's been watching hot tax, and things are bouncing back. We suffered 35% loss last year, as a lot of towns did, but it wasn't nearly as significant as most. So today we're hopefully going to lay the foundation work on some of the aspects of what a DMO and CBB is, which are interchangeable, and Shane will get into that. But without further ado, I want to introduce Shane Sorensen. Shane is with Texas Travel Alliance, TTA for our government acronym. TTA has been around a long time. They're really big into trying to promoting tourism from the attraction side, the hotel side, to the convention side. Anything that's kind of interrelated with the tourism aspect, TTA deals with. As I've mentioned many of you, TTA is very much like the TML buffer tourism. So, Shane, how long have you been there now?
I've been there since 2018. I've been in the industry about 10, 11 years, somewhere around there.
And you've worked for several CBBs in your history.
Yeah, so I
let's go ahead and give us an introduction.
Yeah, so good afternoon. I'm Shane Sorensen. I started my career out in Wichita Falls at their Convention and Visitors Bureau in 2012 after working in a different department of the city for a few years. I happened to land into a spot at the CBB, and I didn't know what it was the morning I interviewed for it. And I've just kind of fallen in love with the whole idea of improving the quality of life for our local residents by bringing in outside spending. Tourism is the purest form of economic development because you don't have to build anything to make it happen. And so I did that for several years, and then Plano stole me away, and I worked for Plano for 4 years. And in that time, I went from what's known as convention servicing, where I'm helping groups and facilitating, making sure all their needs are taken care of when they come to town, to actually being the person that goes out and finds the groups and helps bring them to town through various sales conferences and that sort of thing. And once I had done that, an opportunity came open to help launch a brand new DMO in Bastrop, and so I moved down to Bastrop in September of 17. to get that organization up and off the ground, and I moved there as the director of sales. And once they had a firm footing and had everything in place, I went over economic development, lost their third manager in 2 years, or third director in 2 years, and the city manager's like, I need you to go over there and help keep things afloat over there. So I went over and did a stint in economic development, and once they had a new permanent director in place and things were rocking and rolling again, Texas Travel Alliance stole me away. So now in my new role, I'm basically responsible for supporting our members across the state, whether they are attractions or hotels, water parks, theme parks, zoos, aquariums, cities, state parks. Generally, if anybody touches a traveler or tourism in the state, they're allowed to be members, and my job is to help support them and to support their efforts. We are an education organization that provides professional development for those in the travel industry. We're also a lobbying and advocacy organization, making sure the guys down in Austin are not doing anything to hinder travel and tourism to and within the state. So that's kind of the 90 or 120-second nutshell of who we are and what we do and what I do. And so thank you all for having me here. I think this is an exciting conversation that you're having, and I look forward to seeing kind of where it goes and being a part of it any way we can to support you guys.
So tell them what we've handed out, and
So,
go ahead and jump into the meeting.
Yeah. So in this first packet here that has our logo on the front of it, I kind of wanted to jump into what is a CVB or DMO, and how we'll get into the different possible structures that exist out there, and I will tell you there are anomalies to every single one of them. There's not a cookie cutter that exists for what a CVB or DMO is, but we can talk about some of the standards that exist. When I say DMO, I mean Destination Marketing Organization. That's kind of the new phrase. For the last 5 or so years, that's been pretty common. I'm sorry. In the 90s and early 2000s, it was mostly a CVB or Convention and Visitors Bureau. 99% of them are the same thing, and so a lot of people use those words interchangeably.
Fallacy, being CVB, you don't have to have a convention center to be
right.
a true CVB. There's no.
Think of who they're serving rather than what facilities they technically have. A Convention and Visitor Bureau, the mindset is that they're serving conventions, they're attracting conventions and conferences to town. And so the reason the shift has gone to Destination Marketing Organization is just because the words Convention and Visitors Bureau implies there's a lot of government bureaucracy in it, and it kind of has steered meeting and convention planners away from them for many years. And so Destination Marketing Organization kind of gets to the heart of why the organization exists in the first place, and that's kind of the words. Just full transparency, there is already another shift happening in the industry where they're starting to transition from marketing organization to management organization, because there are destinations that don't need to market. And think Fredericksburg, for example. Fredericksburg is being crushed by over-tourism. It doesn't look like Fredericksburg anymore. The people there who are running things are not from Fredericksburg. The tourist attractions are not original Fredericksburg tourist attractions for the most part. They're all outside investors that have kind of come in and flooded the market and taken over everything. And so Fredericksburg is having to step from a marketing standpoint into a management standpoint to try to manage tourism in their destination to make it more sustainable. That way they're not destroying quality of life for their residents and driving the residents out. They're managing it and finding that balance. So there is that transition where DMO is even being used for 2 different words there. For the most part, they're all nonprofits, and I'm not going to read these word for word, but their primary goal is to be the tourism marketing arm of the city, to specifically target tourism, whether that is group tourism with bus groups, with conventions and meetings and conferences, or individual tourist and leisure tourism, family travel, that sort of thing. So any kind of tourism marketing and sales for the city, they're driving the local economy by promoting that. They are supposed to be the non-biased form of information to the visitor. So if you have a DMO and somebody calls, they're not necessarily saying, oh, I'm going to recommend that you stay in this hotel because this hotel is a member of ours. They're going to recommend where that person's going to get the best experience that they're looking for, that matches what they're looking for. So it's a non-biased source of information for anything in the community that's going to contribute to that visitor experience. And naming gets really tricky. I've put some examples there. Visit Lubbock, Discover San Angelo, Destination Bryan, which just split off from Experience Bryan College Station, and Experience Arlington has now switched back to become Arlington Convention and Visitors Bureau, and then Amarillo CVC went independent, and now they're at Amarillo Convention and Visitors Bureau. But when you hear these names like Visit so-and-so or Experience so-and-so, it's all saying the same thing. That's the destination marketing organization. People they just are drawn to whatever buzzword they think best fits their brand. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about value proposition, why a community, I believe, should invest in a destination marketing organization. And it's simple. It's travel and tourism enhances the quality of life for the destination. It provides jobs. It brings in tax dollars through visitor spending that support city infrastructure and maintenance that takes the tax burden off of local residents to have to make up. And so on average in Texas, visitor spending, without visitor spending, each taxpayer would have to pay about $750 more a year in their property taxes. And that's every resident in Texas would have to pay about $750 more a year in property taxes if it were for the difference that travel and tourism spending makes up in tax dollars. It's the second largest export industry in the state. So roughly 60,000 small businesses across the state, 1.2 million jobs are supported by travel and tourism. Here in, I've got some stats down at the bottom there for you. The numbers for 2020 are still preliminary. They will be finalized in July, so they may be revised a little bit, but that's 320 jobs locally that are supported directly by travel and tourism. And you can see the direct spending in Kenyan is $30.4 million a year that travel and tourism is spending here. So the economic impact to the community is significant to this town. And so any questions or thoughts about that before we kind of talk about structure, or any ideas there?
Don't get caught on you guys.
So there's three main structures that exist for CDBs or DMOs. One of the common ones is to be a city department, and whether that is a department directly like within the city. I've seen them in Plano. Our CDB was housed under Parks and Recreation. In Wichita Falls, we were a city department, but we were housed under the Convention Center Director. I've seen them housed under the Economic Development Department. But in any case, no matter who they reported to, they were considered a city department. And so ultimately they answer to the city manager and council. And so we'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages. My goal here is to kind of present an unbiased, here's what they look like, so that you all can have this discussion and see if there's something that makes more sense to the goals that you have as you all start looking at what this might look like being developed. Advantages: direct accountability to the funding source. So city's the one collecting the hot taxes. They're personally accountable. They have a direct line of supervision all the way up to the city manager or the council. There is less duplication of efforts, so they are utilizing the staff that you already have in existence, being an accounting department, an HR department, and those sorts of things. Whereas, for example, if it were an independent organization, you either have to outsource that at probably a much higher expense, or create it and hire those accounting and HR professionals in-house. So there's something to consider there. One of the things that I really like on this list is interaction and coordination with other departments. So in any time I was working for a DMO, there would be inevitably an event that would come to town, and for example, I had a car show that had 460 Corvettes in town, and I needed some streets closed. And it was a very, very simple call for me to call over to the streets department and say, hey, I need these streets closed, barricades put up on such and such date between these times, and I could pull a permit a lot easier being an internal city department. It just made it a little more seamless of a process to get those things done versus if I was some other outside agency having to come in and request all of that. And then the other thing is just thinking about the employees being personnel benefits. Those are much easier to wrap into your own internal benefit structure. Some of the disadvantages is that it can get political, political influence. I've seen that take its toll on leadership. I've seen communities where every time a new city manager or new city council is elected, they clean house. And they're like, I don't like anything that you've been doing, and I want to clean house and start all over. And it's kind of unfortunate whenever an organization has put branding in place, they put marketing in place, and they're bringing people to the community, and someone gets elected on a case of we don't want anybody to come here, so I'm going to get in office and I'm going to shut all of that down. It's very rare, but I have seen it, and it's unfortunate when that happens because it kind of just stalls everything that's been in place. So that's an advantage that can happen even though it is rare, or sorry, a disadvantage. And then there are times when the hoteliers or the attraction community, the stakeholders in the community feel left out of the conversation. They feel left out of the decision making, and they feel like council or city management is going to get them on board with a new marketing campaign or a new program, that sort of thing. And then the other thing that I've run into is traditional city purchasing policies. When you're in a position to go out and meet with tour bus operators, tour operators, and convention planners and conference planners, and you're trying to convince them to bring their event to Kenyan, it's not uncommon for Hilton and Marriott and Hyatt to be at some of these same places, and they've got their credit card out, and they're whining and dining and they're schmoozing and that sort of thing, and that's kind of the standard. And I've been in a situation where I needed to take a potential client out to dinner. They had a 400 room night piece of business that would have had over $1 million impact on the community. I couldn't buy them a glass of wine with their dinner because my city's purchasing policies wouldn't allow it. And so most of the time, as an employee, I would just buy it personally and I wouldn't get reimbursed, but that was just what I had to do to protect trying to secure the business. And so I've seen communities, Plano, for example, they had a separate clause in their employee code of conduct and purchasing policies that said the CVB sales employees were allowed to purchase up to 2 drinks per person at a dinner. But we also had to fill out this long, exhaustive form of who we were meeting, what business we were talking about, how much we spent, and list all of their names and contact information, which was not always easy to get. And you know, someone with ABC meetings and events may not want someone from the city's purchasing department calling and saying, did you have 2 glasses of wine with Shane while y'all talked about such and such? It's just not a professional environment. And so, again, most of the time I would end up just making those purchases quietly and on my own dime. So just to keep that in mind, that's just the nature of the industry. And so there's some clauses there that maybe you should be aware of. A second major type of CVB or DMO is to be housed inside the Chamber of Commerce. That's pretty common, especially as you get into smaller communities. Snyder, for example, right up the street, it's the Chamber and Visitors Bureau. Rockport Fulton, it's housed within the is housed within the chamber. There's a number of communities across the state where their tourism efforts have always been housed within the chamber, and they're still housed within the chamber, and that's the way it's probably always going to be. And so that's a proven model, and it works. There are some challenges with that. Most of the time, it does require a second board, because it's not always clean when the chamber board of business owners that may or may not be affiliated with tourism in any standpoint are making tourism-related decisions that's just not their best strength. And so it really, if it's going to be housed within the chamber, it almost needs a second board just for their tourism efforts.
Generally has that way.
Yeah.
Before they split.
And things to really take into consideration is, and I'm not familiar with everything happening here in Kenyan or the local relationships and politics of everything, but not every chamber has a good standing in their own community. And so that's something to be mindful of, is no matter what we believe in this room, what is the general perception in the public that exists of who our chamber leadership is. And so if it's positive, then that's a really great thing. If it's negative, that can really affect other things, especially when you start taking into account hotel ownership and management groups and other attractions. So that's something to keep in mind. It can be an advantage or big disadvantage. And chambers are really great at connecting businesses. That's their strength. That's always been their strength. And I think that's their main focus. And so, again, it's just, are they in the position, are they geared already to focus on tourism? That may or may not be the case. But that's something that I think that is worth consideration and worth assessing. The beauty of it is they already have offices. They may have an extra space where someone can land. They've probably got benefit structure and everything else set up already, so there could be some cost savings by wrapping it into those efforts. I will say one of the disadvantages that I've run into a number of times, and I have colleagues across the country who work for chambers, and they say, I can only promote my members. When I'm talking to a meeting planner, an event planner, a convention organizer, a sports tournament director, I can't recommend that they book at any property in my town unless that property is a member of the chamber. That may be the best property in town, that may be the only player in town, that may be the only sports field in town, that may be the only coliseum in town. If they're not a chamber member, that person is forbidden from promoting it. And
these dollars aren't coming from their members yet, though, so they still have issues with that?
Yep, 90% of the time.
Just political.
And
Well,
so
I think that's what some of the issues Amarillo was having.
As the purpose of a DMO, if I'm the salesperson for the DMO, or I'm the person promoting Kenyan, I want to be as non-biased as possible, because I want the visitor to have the best experience. So if that means they're staying at a Hampton Inn or a Holiday Inn Express or a Courtyard, I want them to stay where they're wanting to have the best experience, and not necessarily. Let's say you've got a 400-room Hyatt, just to make up something that doesn't exist here. If you've got a 400-room Hyatt and my planner wants to stay there and they're not a member, and I couldn't support that hotel, then I'm not servicing the business the way I should be. I'm not giving them the best experience possible. So that's something that I think is worth considering, is if you're going to house it in a chamber, make sure there's some kind of structure in place where they have the flexibility and the encouragement to support the entire community, not just the membership. I've seen it, and I've seen people put in really, really sticky situations where they've had to pass up a piece of business because they couldn't talk about someone who wasn't their member. And that's kind of unfortunate.
And that's between that chamber and that chamber director. That wouldn't have anything to do with the city. That'd be a relationship or an agreement they'd have to make with their own board.
But again, their revenue that pays the salary of this person is going to be paid by the broad base. I mean,
Right.
It's going to be
Yeah.
all the hotels.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, which that's why it's always a conflict, because all the hotels are contributing to the hotel occupancy tax, but that's paying for that position, but if they're only given the flexibility under their chamber direction to promote their members, then you're excluding somebody.
Or a piece of a salary. It's not
Right.
necessarily, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be a whole salary.
Right.
It may just be a budget.
Right.
That comes in.
So just making sure that you have some clear guidelines in place if you're going to go that route is something that I would recommend. What the expectation is, really setting a very clear expectation. And there's a bullet on there that you really don't have to consider here yet, but in some communities you have a black chamber, you have a Hispanic chamber, you have multiple chambers of commerce, and so in those communities, again, it gets very political, because if you pick one chamber, I'm going to house the DMO in this chamber, somebody in the other chamber might get offended, and then you've got local politics and voices and everything else causing a bunch of drama. Fortunately, we don't have to deal with that here. And then the third type is basically an independent nonprofit organization that's typically a 501c6 organization, and there's quite a bit of fine print in there that you can read, but this is kind of becoming the new standard that every major CBB or DMO has moved over to, and now a lot of the other ones, now have made it easy to emulate. A lot of smaller DMOs and new DMOs are just automatically going to this format for a number of reasons. It gives them more community representation. They're typically guided by a board of directors, and on that board you have council representation, or city management representation, you have chamber representation, so that they feel like the business community is being heard. And then you can put hoteliers on that board, you can put attractions on that board, so really you can pull together every aspect of the community that is related to tourism and affected by tourism, and make sure they have representation on that board. And so that's kind of a new standard that I really like.
They still answer the commission, really?
So they would have a contract with the city, a contract for services. And so the commission would determine, okay, here's what we're paying this organization to do, is to provide the services of a destination marketing organization. And then we're going to put it on a 2-year, 3-year contract and look at it, make sure they're meeting the standards every time that contract's up for renewal. Whenever I worked for one of these, we had a once-a-year workshop in June, and where we talked about, here's what our efforts were for the year, here's the milestones that we've met or didn't meet or we're on our way to meeting, and we still reported directly to the commission or council, and we were still held accountable by that, but the board also held us accountable monthly at our board meetings. And so that was basically to make sure we're hitting all the key points that we needed to hit to make sure that funding was renewed for the following year.
Who's typically appointing those board members?
The first board was appointed by the commission, and it was done through a nominations process, and then the commission would sort through that, and they would appoint those board members for a 1-, 2-, or 3-year appointment. That way they could stagger. And then after the initial round, it was a 3-year appointment, but they set the very first board as a 1-, or 2-, or 3-year appointment. They just drew straws to figure that out. That way you don't have an entire board renewing at the same time every other year.
What typical party interests were on that board, or typically?
Again, I would definitely make sure the chamber is represented on the board, probably in an ex officio position. Our city was represented in an ex officio position. We had our Main Street manager on there, so that all of those areas felt represented. We had someone representing the restaurants, and the requirement was they had to be a locally owned restaurant, because that's when you travel somewhere, you probably don't want to eat at Chili's. You probably don't want to eat somewhere that you could eat at in any city in America. You want something that represents the local flavor. So I would recommend having someone that represents the restaurant community, having someone that represents the hotel community. If outdoor recreation is a thing, make sure that's represented. That's huge here. When I was in Bastrop, our superintendent from Bastrop State Park was on our board. And it helped build a lot of bridges between our park and our community that there weren't any negative things happening there, but there wasn't any positive. It was just a non-existent relationship. So that really helped us there.
I think probably since we got a big university in town, we get a lot of athletic tourism.
Athletics, then I would make sure your athletics is supported and represented.
Like a Lisa Davis person or somebody.
Now, but you're saying the commission continues to reappoint those positions?
Once it's set the first time, then it goes through a nomination process and the board determines that on its own.
What we're doing EDC.
But
So they could have, no. the
Except
EDC
for those
said
going.
last. The EDC said last, what he's saying is.
I know, but they nominate and do all that in the ring.
you could set up either structure that you like.
But the commission has final say so, but in this case, they wouldn't have the final say so.
In this case, the board, once it was set, they kind of managed themselves moving
Okay.
forward.
So
But-
they could vote on all the hotel people, and they could vote on.
Well, that was the tricky part is in the bylaws, they said that there was required to be one board member representing restaurants, one board member representing hotels, one board member representing outdoor recreation or sports. And so they said, here's the type of person we want on, but we're not going to have to tell you who it is every time. And so they kind of put that qualifier in place to make sure that there was somebody continually representing those interests.
And typically is the representation from this body ex officio?
Typically. And that's something, if you don't want it to be typical and you want a straight seat, then that's something that you all could decide. What I think is important when you're looking at creating a board like this, if that's what you're doing, is to make sure there's not a perception that the city is creating this independent organization and then still trying to pull all the strings. I've been in communities where there's that perception, like, oh yeah, they gave them the independence they wanted, but they've got 4 of the 6 voting or 4 of the 7 voting members. They control 4 of those votes, and so it was like, what's the point? And so just make sure that if you do have a voting seat, that you're not really representing a controlling interest if your intent is really for it to be independent, if that makes sense. Another important consideration if you're looking at an independent organization, one of the advantages that I think is important is really their number one goal is to market the community, get people here in the first place. That is hard for cities to do. It really is. Cities hire communications and PIOs and dispatchers and public safety officers and such. And I say this having worked for several cities in many different positions, cities are not good at marketing. Economic development organizations are good at marketing, chambers are pretty good at marketing, EDCs are good at marketing, but a city as itself is generally not good at marketing because a city's core purpose is to provide public safety and infrastructure support, and water and those sorts of things that make life possible. And your current pay structure is not really amenable to hiring a professional marketer who is good at marketing because your pay structure probably can't compete with what the private market can do. An independent organization, they can make those calls. They can hire someone who is a professional marketer who is probably going to make market rate or somewhere near it what they're actually worth to come in and really do a really good job representing the city. So
how are they going to be able to pay more? Is there other things?
Because it's a nonprofit. A nonprofit organization can develop their own pay structure that's competitive with what the market would demand a professional marketer make.
You're saying not because the city doesn't have the funds, because the city's not willing to pay them.
Right. It'd be very difficult because how cities classify jobs.
It would blow the pay scale.
Right. It would really mess up the pay scale. When I was in Plano, I had the same job title as 4 other employees in the city, yet I worked in the convention center, yet I worked outside of the convention center and put conventions in every hotel in town. And there was somebody who managed a small theater for 45 people, and we had the same job titles. Our jobs were completely different, but we were on the same job title, same pay scale, and everything else. And then I found out my counterparts, the next city over in Frisco, were making 2 to 3 times what I was making, doing the same exact job. But Plano couldn't pay that because my job title matched the local theater manager's job title. It's just a really interesting structure that they have.
Bureaucratic.
Yeah, and so it makes it difficult when you're looking at how much does a professional marketer make. I know some in the DMO world that are making 6 figures plus, and Philip Jones, when he was running Visit Dallas, he was making $700,000 a year before bonuses. Find me a
That made the news.
yeah, yeah. And so did his $700 suitcase that was in every news article there. But find me another city employee who's making $700,000 a year. But that's the rate.
770,000, if you're curious.
Yeah, yeah.
Not that I looked that up.
It just it doesn't fit normal city pay very easily. I'm sure Joe, you'd love to be on that pay scale.
I'm like, man, we should have gone into marketing.
Yeah.
What is the city
It also
management
brings
do?
in a significant amount of additional expenses.
Mm-hmm.
As far as just the operational of it, it's not money that's gonna go for advertising, it's gonna go for office rental, for staff, and for those salaries.
Right. And I've been in it. Go ahead.
To me, that's some of the advantage of looking at one of the other alternatives.
Right.
Is, you know, we've got office space over with Main Street and EDC, and I don't know about Chamber, how that would fit, but.
We'll force them into Evelyn's office furnishing that.
Do what?
We'll force them in there with Evelyn.
And I've been in really interesting situations. In Bastrop, the city owned a little house that was technically a historic house that was sitting empty, and they said, okay, y'all have that. So we didn't have to pay rent. The city owned something that wasn't being utilized. We housed there for free, and they said, we'll handle all your HR, but you need to handle your own accounting. So I was hired through the city, and it was really strange and complicated on paper. I went through the city's hiring process, the city's HR process, but was an employee of the DMO. So if you think about it, the city was funding the DMO and then charging the DMO back for the HR services that were being provided.
We're familiar with that.
Yeah, and so that's a way to not have to bring on a lot of extra overhead, but to still accomplish the independence of the organization. The DMO still made hiring and firing and employment decisions, but it was all just processed through the city's HR, and we're on the city's benefit structure as well.
Put them in the courthouse.
Plenty of room over there.
Real room over there.
I don't think we own that building.
Last time I checked, we did not.
Yeah.
And we've probably got more to go through, Shane. I'd be really interested to hear if this person, we hired somebody in under whatever scenario, what does their job look like on a monthly basis? What are they actually doing?
Go ahead, Shane can answer that.
So the first and foremost job is market. Get some marketing out there that says, here's Kenyan, we exist, and we want you to come and visit. Currently, that doesn't exist.
Are they doing it here via, marketing efforts, or are they getting out and getting the streets?
99% of what they can do is here. It's purchasing ad buys, it's digital advertising on the internet, hitting people's phones. One simple but probably semi-expensive thing I would do is geo-fence the park. And anybody that steps foot in the state park has now got a flag, and wherever they call home, they're going to get served an ad to come back to Kenyan, Texas. That it's creepy technology, but it exists. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've mentioned wanting spaghetti, and then all of a sudden I'm served an ad on my phone 5 minutes later for Olive Garden or Spaghetti Warehouse or something.
That's good.
Now,
Yeah.
we're doing some of that, though. I mean, am I not right? We have one, and I drove through Africa the other day, or Hill Center, and there's a billboard there that's got a picture of Malibu Canyon.
And they're putting those flyers in hotels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
But
Here's a small piece of that.
I think most of their job is going to be spent on marketing. And here's the thing is, you've got a built-in audience of 400,000 people a year coming to the state park, 393 in 2019. They've only got 168 campsites So there's a huge gap between the actual visitation versus where they're staying the night when they're coming here. I was looking at the numbers earlier. I don't know if y'all are familiar with these, but they were kind of mind-blowing for me. 40% of the visitation in 2019 was from Amarillo. So those people we're just going to consider they're going home at night. But that means 60% are not from Amarillo. They're from DFW, Houston, other rural areas, or 22% are from outside of Texas altogether. That's still 40,000 people a year that are sleeping somewhere if they're coming from outside of Texas. And so how can we make sure those rooms are here? How can we make sure they're sleeping, they're eating their dinners here? And if they don't know that Kenyan exists as more than a place to fill up with gas before they hit the road again, then there's a missed marketing opportunity there. And that's where I think a DMO could really make a difference in this community, is by saying, okay, we're not the gateway like Amarillo comes to. We're not the gateway to the canyon. We're the home of the canyon. Oh, and by the way, here's 10 other things that you can experience while you're here. We have this awesome downtown. There's 3 local restaurants here that you're going to love to eat at that you can't get anywhere else, or whatever the number is. We've got the Panhandle Plains Museum, which, touring it for the 14 minutes I was in it earlier today, I would rival against any museum I've seen in Texas, especially the Bullock, which is kind of a letdown. But it's creating this awareness that I don't think currently exists out there. Driving here, I wasn't even sure what to expect. I expected a town kind of like Snyder. Dusty, mostly closed up and boarded up, and with a couple of places that were overcrowded after the Sunday church crew let out. And I ended up eating 2 Crispitos at the gas station because that's where I could get lunch. That's not at all the case here. And so the fact that that wasn't front of mind means there's a missed opportunity out there that exists. And so I think having an organization dedicated first and foremost to marketing and putting you guys on the map to the visitors that are already coming is a huge opportunity.
Are we putting a permit for the horse before we move downtown?
No, I don't think so. I think it's going to be interrelated. Shane and I walked around the square for a good hour and talked about both aspects.
See, I had some questions too, saying, are there other things we need to do in Kenyan first before we really?
I think tourism is the answer to help pay for some of those things. You can invest a lot in capital expenditures and that sort of thing, trying to build a destination, but really it's not going to be sustainable until you have the tourism here to support it. You're going to continue filling retail spaces with businesses that don't have the visitor spending, because the locals are going to come in once or twice, unless it's just a fascinating place that they're constantly changing up their product line and to bring back the locals. You've got to have the visitor spending where it's new to every single person that walks in the door, or it's not going to be sustainable. They're not going to be able to pay the increasing rental prices, and they're going to leave, or they're going to close up. Same thing with restaurants. If you're not introducing a fresh audience to it, then they're not going to be sustainable. And so I think it's a balance, and I think you bring in the tourism to support the businesses that already need the support, that need to keep their doors open, and then as there's a balance, then you work with the demand. As new visitation comes in, as increased visitation comes in, it will help fill the holes in downtown. It'll help fill the retail spaces. And then once you've got those spaces, it's just kind of a back and forth. I think if there's this, for example, there's this guy that just bought most of Gerald. It's basically a truck stop on 35 between Temple and Austin. And this guy from California came in and bought the entire what exists of the city. And he decided he's going to make it this wonderful tourism stop. He doesn't have anything there to fill in, so he's trying to find businesses that he can put there, but they haven't built their visitation first to support those businesses. And so he's basically got 3 square blocks of empty buildings that he can't fill. So I think there's a balance. I see where you're at, but I think there's a balance in it. And if you bring in the tourism right and monitor things. You don't want to crush yourselves. You don't want to crush your local businesses by overloading them where they can't sustain it. Then you're in a Fredericksburg situation, and nobody. It sounds exciting. It sounds great to say, oh, I've got 35,000 people a weekend coming and marching on my sidewalks, but the locals hate it. Waco's kind of experiencing that. They've got 36,000 people a month coming to Waco because of what Chip and Joanna have done in Waco. And it sounds great from an economic development standpoint. It's phenomenal. They're able to do things that they never thought they'd be able to do. They're saving parts of their city that they thought they were going to have to tear down. But that's come at a cost. They're tearing down entire city blocks and putting up new hotels faster. They opened 4 hotels in the pandemic. They're tearing down places where people live downtown, and they're being pushed out so that a new developer can come in and put in high-rise lofts that are $1,400 a month for a 1-bedroom. And so they're hurting their local residents in that environment to cater exclusively to the visitor environment. So I think there's a balance there that you have to monitor and be aware of when it comes to that sort of thing.
So, and I'm completely ignorant about the whole industry, but just from an outsider's perspective, when I have a group come in and tell me that they want to increase the number of people that come to our town and spend the night in our town, who almost couldn't find a room in our town, that's problematic for me to understand. Why would we want someone to come in and try to increase the occupancy of our hotels when we're at capacity? And then the other issue I have right now, maybe I don't understand the process, is who are you going to crowd out in the hotel tax now? Because we split that up. That goes a bunch of different ways, and now you're another piece of that pie. Am I correct?
Yes, as far as who's receiving hotel occupancy tax.
So you're going to, based on maybe not bringing a bunch of new people in for the first couple of years, because those hotels haven't been built, but you're going to crowd out other people that have got us to the point where we are, where those hotels are at capacity. Or am I completely not understanding what's going on?
No,
which kind of leads me down to what these guys are saying is, sounds like a phenomenal idea, just not sure that it sounds like a phenomenal idea today, because you're going to be pulling people in to stay where?
Right. You can make the decision to kind of start looking at this, and I know if y'all develop this is a process. This is a probably 12, 18 month, 24 month process of even developing something like this. The people are here already. The visitors are here already. So what's happening is you're just not capitalizing on the money. The money's going to Lubbock, the money's going to Amarillo. So you're already missing out on about $240, $260
But your goal is for them to stay here?
My goal would be for them to stay here to support the local jobs.
But we already are at capacity. We need more hotels. We don't have enough. And you couldn't convince someone to have a convention here because there's no place to have a convention.
I saw a giant coliseum right over there that could host basketball arenas. It could host dinners on the floor.
Well, where would they stay?
That would come. I think, knowing that you have another hotel in the works, it's going to probably upset the existing hotels a little bit, because there's this mentality, well, if they get something, I won't get it. But I don't think the answer is either or. I think it's yes and. I think that when it comes to tourism, the tide lifts all boats. So when you have increased visitor spending, it's going to support more restaurants. It's going to support more hotels. It's going to support those local jobs. I've never heard a small business owner say, I don't want more customers on the door. Not here anyways. Even in Fredericksburg.
Are you thinking too that, looking on down the line, that the new hotel, that increased hot tax, say by, 50% increase or something, that could be some of the dollars that could pay for this?
Yeah. That's what kind of spurred this.
The other big piece of it, Cody, to me, is to bring the people down to the square to where the businesses are, so if they do more business, if they do better in their business, more profitable.
And
I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
I'm just not sure where you're gonna.
I see what you're saying, well, they'll still stay in that road, but they'll come to the square market.
they'll still generate they may not generate more hot taxes for the time being, but they can generate more sales taxes.
Generate more sales taxes.
But the problem with that is whose piece of the pie are we cutting?
No, I agree.
Is it gonna be Texas? Is it gonna be the chamber? Is it gonna be, who is it gonna be?
Well-
If we did it next month, somebody's
Somebody's getting cut.
Well, and I think one of the things to really consider is look at where the money is currently going. There's every, and I say every community in Texas talks about it, which is why TML put it in their article. Fireworks. It's a big thing in every community for hotel occupancy tax. This, by the way, is just for reference. That's a TML article that I like to reference from time to time about legal ways hotel occupancy taxes can and should be spent, kind of the spirit of why the law exists. The argument is if we're going to do this, then somebody's getting their budget cut, whether that's the chamber or the museum or whoever is currently receiving those funds. I think the goal is to not necessarily cut those funds, but to say, if we bring in more tourism, we bring in more businesses have the ability to join the chamber, that's going to raise your budget automatically. So I'm not trying to take it, I'm trying to replace it. Does that make sense?
It's kind of like an investment, it seems like to me.
Like, rather than...
I mean, they may have to cut their budget for a little while, but hopefully it's going to pay off in the long run.
Rather than pull funding from the museum, I'd rather get more people in the door so I don't have to use hot funds to pay for it.
So
That sort of thing. That's kind of where my approach is let's figure out another way to pay for it.
my viewpoint on it is, when I worked at the museum, I did the reports on the hot tax for a little bit, and it goes towards marketing efforts, and it goes towards bringing the outside people in. So those hot tax dollars are meant for what a DMO is doing, and so while it might lessen a little bit for some of these local attractions, those same dollars are still being spent in the same ways, from what I can understand. It's not just the museum buying a digital billboard or geofencing or specific advertising in certain places. It's the DMO doing it for the entire city, for local businesses, which in turn will still benefit
And
all the businesses.
that's a good point. I've seen in communities where there was one community, 7 different organizations were given hot funds every year to promote that city as a place to visit. And they all got really upset when those funds were taken away to create a DMO. But collectively, the DMO had a much larger impact. They had a much higher marketing spend and a higher volume of visitors that they were able to attract than each one of these taking their little $20,000 doesn't get you much, $50,000 doesn't get you much in marketing. But you collectively take it and say, I've got $150,000 in marketing, now we're talking, you can do something with that. It collectively goes so much farther. And if you're able to do those types of things, then it kind of makes up for it with the return on business that they otherwise would have gotten in the first place. So I think the goal is not to cut anyone's funding. The goal, in my opinion, would be to just find a new way to fund it. And in the meantime, that may mean we're going to, instead of, say, the city granting all these hot fund grants every year, maybe the city says, okay, we're going to give this pot of money to the DMO to manage, and we're going to let the DMO board create a grant process to make sure that every dollar that is given out is truly spent on attracting visitors back to Canyon, and develop a grant process or something along those lines. I mean, there's a lot of ways that you could go about doing it, but that way it's not the city, again, not politically, it's not the city pulling the strings. It is a board that represents the travel and tourism industry in the community making the decision on how those dollars are being spent in the first place. And if they think that the museum still needs that grant, then collectively they can make that decision. So I'm not saying no, but I'd rather increase the overall pot of money to begin with, rather than so that everybody gets a little bit more of the pie, than try to figure out who I'm not taking pie from.
Yeah, but until the new hotels come in, Cody's right, that's split up.
Until that point, yeah, and I understand all the concepts.
Sure.
don't make a mistake about that. I understand all of it's gonna rise at the same time. We just got a little gap here.
Right.
Where to me, it's not gonna make a whole lot of sense when, you know, if we're a year and 2 or 3 months from today, that hotel's up and running, and we have this excess, and it would be wise for us to invest that in a new way. This seems like the most logical way to do that, and to have it independent. I mean, I have zero issues with it being independent.
Sure.
I like it being set up the way you're talking about it being set up. My fear is, and I hate bringing it up, but COVID.
Right.
And all of these guys are just struggling, they're scrambling to survive. And then we're gonna come back and go, hey, guess what? We're gonna take a big old piece of your pie. Trust us, it's for your own good.
I really think that if this is a route that you're gonna go down and to create something like this, I really think they need to be in the room. I think you need to have them in the room, have them a part of the conversation, and get their buy-in and get their support. That's not easy. Just from experience, it's not easy to get everybody in the room. And so get through the first couple of meetings, let everybody voice their opinion, their frustration, their angst, or whatever that may be, and then say, okay, we hear you. Now it's time to do the work. How can we help? How can we work together to make this something that you can support? And making sure their voices are heard is probably why a lot of them get angry in the first place, because they don't feel heard. So giving them that opportunity to be a part of the solution. I've seen the organizations where the local historical society was getting 70% of their funding from hot tax. They said, you know what, we're going to do our own capital funding campaign every year. We'll do a gala. We'll come up with our own funding mechanism. We think this is worth it. We've been a part of it. They had a seat on the board. They were part of all the decision making. They said, we will give up this funding because this organization, this new organization, is going to have an impact that we can't have by ourselves.
Mayor, I hate to interrupt, but it's 4:33.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe we need to circle back around.
Sure.
But Joe, before we do, well, any last that,
Yeah, we're like Cody said, we're not rushing into this. I think we're in prime time to start working this path. And so if that's in 12 to 18 months, that's okay. We need to work that direction. So I'd like to have a couple commissioners continue to work with us on this. And the two that consistently come to me about tourism is Gary and Mr. Rennie. And so I'd like to get kind of the head nod from the whole crew here to see if we can continue researching homework. I don't think this will be the last time Shane comes. I'd like to have him come back to have these discussions. You know, some of the other trips I have planned is possibly going to Dr. Amarillo's CBB, talking to hoteliers, you know, having the talks that Shane was mentioning. So that I'd like to continue to research and go down this path. But today we wanted to lay kind of the foundation of the house. And so we want to go ahead and build from there. And our house may not be done for 18 months, and that's okay. That's okay. That's what we should need to do most things. You know, thankfully, for once, we're not rushing into it. You know, we're educating ourselves and researching and doing the homework to see which one's right for us, this is the right direction for us. So if you guys are agreeable to that, that's what we'd like to do moving forward. Unless somebody else would like to step up as well, but those two have mentioned tourism on a number of occasions. So does Paul not want to jump in too? Sure. Garrett, do you maybe have Randy and Paul involved? Would you be okay with that instead of you? Or do you want to be involved?
you know, I'm good either way. Yeah, like I say,
Randy's been the one that's talked to me at least 2 or 3 occasions. Wherever you want. Okay. We'll have Randy and Paul. You go with that, Paul? Gary, is that okay?
yeah, I'd like to be kept moved, but probably
Absolutely.
the rest of us would too, so.
Absolutely. We'll have these two be a little more hands-on, if you're okay with that.
Okay.
So, Cody? Are you okay with that?
All good.
Okay. Well, thank you, Shane, for visiting with us. We enjoyed spending some time with you, so thanks for allowing us to show off our town.
Oh, I've enjoyed it. My first time here this weekend, and I've had a blast, and I can't wait to be back. I'll be back for sure in September, because we're doing a little thing up the street in Amarillo, about 400 people, but we're bringing our board to Kenyan, and So I will say you're going to have some of the brightest and sharpest minds of tourism in the world, really.
The convention's in Amarillo this year, is it not?
Yes, it's in September. Dr. Petrick, who is a world-renowned tourism expert and travel professor at A&M.
It's a CTA convention, correct?
Mhm.
Yeah, so their convention is in Amarillo this year, and we might try to go.
I know somebody who can get you.
Who can get you.
Yeah.
But really to make this effective, it's gonna take dollars for the salary. I was thinking salary this person's out and about, but it's gonna take salary, but it's marketing dollars too. So
Correct,
It's
yeah.
gonna take you don't want just their salary, but a substantial marketing budget to
Yeah, I think I would hire a great marketer with a really great marketing budget before I did anything else. And that's just my personal opinion, my personal experience. You may choose to go another direction. I don't think that you would need like a full-blown staff. I think you could get by with at max 2 people for the first several years until something more sustainable became an option.
And it may always be like that.
Yeah.
Maybe 1 or 2 person shop, just like BDC is.
Yeah.
Same way.
I'm a huge fan of minimal staffing, maximal programming versus maximum staff that gets nothing done.
Thanks, Shane, so much.
Shane, thank you.
Yeah,
Appreciate you
thank
joining
you all
us
for having
here
me.
For, I guess yesterday evening and today too, so thanks, man.
Thank you.
Appreciate all your
All right.
Well, with that, we're actually running a little after 4:30, so I guess we'll get started at,
Take a short break.
yes.
All right. Head out.
Safe travels going home.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Joe. How are you, sir? Good.
Chris, what are you doing?
It's like sweat on the side.
Living the dream. Living the dream in City Hall.
Have a meeting with my office. Sweden. It's got it in my notes, and I said, what does it?
You go run down.
Well, not stop sweating.
I know she's sweating. I'm like, maybe we should turn there now. You're cool. It's cool, man. Yeah, that was good. Thank you. Yes. We live on YouTube, Gretchen? Are we live on YouTube?
Joseph, it's very fun.
So excited to join y'all.
Yeah, glad you are, so it'll be great. So, Melissa Rice would be really proud too.
Well, I was asking Lila about her the other day, 'cause my mom said she was friends with Lois, so.
Besides
trying
that,
to
my
tell
wife
me.
said, you need to have one on here too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's good.
stupid, I would.
Have one tell you we still need to get together on a lot of legal on EDC deal.
Right. She did mention that.
Okay. We need the three of us need to just put our heads together.
Huh?
Three of us need to put our heads together.
What time frame are you looking at?
So Friday. Good, yeah. Possibly can get Friday.
Okay.
I'm out next Wednesday, my go there.
I know. You get close.
I could do early Friday morning at 8, or I could do mid-afternoon.
You pick.
Mid-afternoon would be great.
Sounds good to me.
Go. Good conversations, you think?
Yeah, I really think so. You know, one, kind of hit me at the end. What does that look like, kind of a minimum budget for that respective product? Salary dollars, $10,000. What kind of numbers that take? Just salary dollars.
Yes, sir. My daughter and I took a ride yesterday. Yesterday afternoon, I'm gonna get my grandson, son-in-law to help me park cars and range ride rodeo on the church. He's part of the new rodeo. We try to space him out, on that for us, so he won't leave in the middle. So he can get out. Because if you don't organize parking, they'll park 3 deep and never put somebody in the middle once they
I need him to, anybody.
We do that work.
Courthouse figured out.
Grandson's just not.
Yeah, what you gonna run?
We get the courthouse figured out, we get some offices.
Perfect. No, we're filling these offices up now. Gary can be the mayor of the state.
You feel like you're making a swale?
I'm still waiting on the architect. I'm still waiting on the architect.
Horses and Harleys.
International headquarters for head of state. There we go.
I'm riding a horse right now.
I think that's gonna be private, because
I've had a 7-year-old.
Can be. We'll make it a hotel. You know, it'll be our next hotel.
96
There's a hotel space there. What do you think?
He was told 96.
And they've been spending money. They pretty much told us, if we spend the money, they'll let us do whatever they want.
I'm trying to double-bred dogs on that horse for
They are
years.
architects. Fine now. But we can't get any THC funds.
She was trying to say, what is
That's what the architect said, they'd warn them out enough.
It was,
That's what she told me on the phone. If we were to spend the money, they pretty much would let us do it.
It was trained as a race horse on the,
That's what she told me. I didn't believe it either.
but apparently the horse was 30 so the young colt, I mean, 4-year-old, the barrel racer. And the young, and she qualified that horse at number 14. So she ended up, she liked better, and she had become a barrel horse.
We select people.
So I can believe that.
You can't select all people up.
He was fast, and he was a little bit taller than a racehorse. He was a little bit taller than your average barrel.
Just for personal use, not for training.
This horse is almost 6 years.
Well,
He's good up there.
it's probably time to get started. All right, I have 4:45, and at this time, we will call the meeting of the Kenyan City Commission to order. And with that, Mayor Pro Tem, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
I'd love to. Would y'all pray with me? Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we just thank you so much for all that you do for us. Father, we just going to thank you in advance for the upcoming rain tonight. Just to believe in faith that that's coming. And Father, we thank you for just blessing the city. We thank you for continuing to offer the protection of the men and women that serve the city of Kenyan, and also for the residents of Father. Father, we just thank you for all that you've done for this community. We pray that you will continue to be with us as we make decisions about the future of our city, and help us when we mess it up. In Christ's name we pray.
Mr. Lyons, will you please?
I hand over your heart.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Before we go on, I would say congratulations on re-election to my fellow commissioners, but also to our new commissioner, Kelsey Wood. So looking forward to having you on board.
Thank you.
Okay, that takes us to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the meeting of April 19th, 2021.
I move we approve.
Have a motion second to approve the minutes as written. All in favor signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Takes us to item number 5, public comments from interested citizens. Gretchen?
Nobody has signed in here.
All right. Thank you. Item number 6, consider and take appropriate action on update of Governor Greg Abbott's executive orders directed at slowing the spread of COVID-19 in the state of Texas. Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Vaccines are still out. I do think our numbers are up to 29 or 30, maybe 31 in 7-9 and 105. Things are still moving out. John, do you want to update on Meals on Wheels?
Meals on Wheels. Last week we met with the Meals on Wheels folks at United on Tuesday, I guess it was, and gave them a handout, a flyer that they were going to take to all their participants. Apparently that's 44 people,
Here in Kenyan.
participants here in Kenyan. And they were to pick that flyer up or information on Friday. They collect things on Friday from the participants, so they're accustomed to handing something in on Friday, so they were going to collect our form. I should see those here in the next couple of days from them. And on that form, I just mentioned that we were, if they were interested in receiving a vaccine and they had not received one, and they were okay with us providing that service in their home, that we would work with the fire department and we would be able to offer them that in-home service. And fire departments even talked about providing some safety inspections of those homes while they're there, whether that's changing a battery in a smoke detector or checking the carbon monoxide detector, doing some other things while they're there, just as a service. We don't know how many that'll be yet because we haven't gotten that back. As soon as we get that back, we'll start working on a schedule when the fire department is available to provide those shots. Then we will contact them and say, hey, we're available between these hours. Can we come by and do that for you? Casey from Amarillo Health has also stated if it's a time that works for them, she might even provide us with a staff member to go with them to fill out the paperwork and take care of those aspects for us. So we're kind of moving along with that with the Meals on Wheels folks. That seems to they thought that was a good idea, and so we reached out to them in that manner. Hope to get that done. While I was there, checked with the pharmacy there at United. They had at least 2 different varieties of vaccine there. At United, you can go online and sign up for an appointment. Some days they give no shots. The day before they'd given like 30. So it just kind of hit and miss. They were starting to see some minors, I guess 16, 18, with parents bringing them in and that were eligible for the shot and were getting the shot. I also personally visited the Amarillo facility on Friday to get my second shot. If you haven't been there lately, they've changed that up. You enter from the west down, just basically one room, and then you're in the shot room. Much fewer shot locations, and they've shrunk that facility down significantly. I've neglected to ask how many they were given on a regular basis there, but I know their numbers are dropping. There were probably 35, 40 people there while I was there during my 30 minutes that I was there, whether I was getting shot or waiting my 15 minutes. So that's it. I know that family medicine still has some vaccines. So that's kind of where we are here in the community. I guess Amarillo has started. Last week was the first week that they offered on Friday their mobile vaccines were available. I think they were available on the north side of Amarillo. Eventually, like sometime in May, toward the end of May, there'll be the Southwest Library, but they're rotating through multiple other locations like they're ready to kind of pull out of the convention, civic center here in the next few weeks probably as that slows down. And maybe I bet they'll upgrade their mobile facilities at that time.
And as a part of Amarillo Public Health, that is something they want us to do, is if we think that that's appropriate in our community center on a Saturday, or, you know, I think that's a piece, if we feel like it's appropriate, would be important, they'd certainly be willing to help facilitate that.
So I think as they wind down fewer days, they'll start to have staff to be able to do those kind of things.
And at this point, I think that's our main focus as a city right now. You know, is the vaccinations and just encouraging folks in that direction. You know, versus, you know, in the past where we really focused on you know, masks and hygiene and distancing. I think right now just the importance of vaccination, both personally, but then also for the community good. And I think that's a piece that hopefully we can get people to buy into, along with the safety of the vaccine. And so Megan's working on a PSA that I guess we'll put out just most any time that I got my second vaccine. Alice Mayberry of Amarillo Public Health came down, gave that to me. She spoke quite a bit, but anyway, just towards the safety of the vaccines, and hopefully we get people to buy into that, and I really think it can make a big difference for our schools, for our businesses, if people will buy into it. Message right now.
Thank you, John, for that update. Appreciate your efforts.
Yeah, thank you, John. All right, takes us to item number 7, to consider and take appropriate action on second and final reading of resolution number 14-2021, the resolution of the City Commission of the City of Kenyan approving funding to the Kenyan Chamber of Commerce by Kenyan Economic Development Corporation, supporting the annual Independence Day celebration. Ellen, Don?
This is a request for $11,500 for fireworks. This is the parade fair on the square concert. This is the one where we have somewhere between 4 million and 30,000 people, whichever's less.
It's a bunch.
Feels like 4 million. This is the second reading. The CEDC had a public hearing on April 8th, and there was no opposition.
Thank you.
This is not going on a hot tax.
There you go.
Here, one second.
I move we adopt resolution 14-2021, approving the funding of the annual Independence Day celebration and requesting by the Kenyan Chamber of Commerce for the Kenyan East.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Item number 8 is to consider and take appropriate action on second and final reading of resolution number 15-2021, a resolution approving a project funding agreement between Kenyan Main Street and Kenyan Economic Development Corporation relating to funding a 12-month all-inclusive marketing plan for Kenyan.
This will include digital saturation with 3,360 commercials daily, traditional static boards in places of high traffic areas, advertising in Texas and in Discover Kenyan. Also been the spring issue of West Texas Travel Host, double page ad there. That Travel Host is put in state travel centers across Texas as well as hotels. Got a new website and a mobile app for Kenyan Main Street that's being developed, and new pole banners that are patriotic in nature. Approximately 90 poles. The funding request is $79,600, and this comes out of our marketing account.
Do y'all get any feedback on hits or anything like that?
Marketing hits.
Marketing hits
On the website?
on your 336 commercials daily?
Unless, no, really good. I mean,
Not getting much analytics on it.
no. Never asked. We get those through Choice Media. But so probably I would say no to your question.
saying earlier, there's a billboard, I think it's in Abernathy, that has Edge of Powder Kenyans and a recliner. Looks like a good place to be, but is that part of these funds, or is that?
Is it Abernathy?
It's either Abernathy or Health Center.
Yes, probably, because we did the Love Market as well as the Northern Market. We touched all states that touch us. Yeah.
Mayor, I make a motion that we adopt resolution number 15, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Item number 9, consider and take appropriate action on resolution number 22-2021, a resolution of the City Commission of the City of Kenyan, Texas, amending the City of Kenyan's fiscal principles and policies. Joe?
Thank you. You're not gonna get out of this, Dave. You enjoy the fun of updating policies and things. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's that time of year to review our financial policies. Joel and I run lead on that. And not a whole lot of changes. I tried to highlight the noteworthy changes, and I left the track changes in there so you could see what changed from the original. But one thing that Joel's been struggling with is trying to do it monthly, so we moved to bi-monthly on the financials. He's just had a hard time with the workload to keep up and do it monthly. So
We used to quarterly too.
yeah, we did. We wanted to do it, but Joel and I had that conversation internally, and we wanted it to be more than quarterly. And so, but yeah, monthly was a little too much, just on workload. So
That's a lot of time in a commission meeting as well.
So if y'all are good, we wanted to do bi-monthly at this point in time. We added a really big new section on grant guidelines. We've been doing a lot of grant pursuits lately. John's been a significant help assisting in those projects along with Joel and Dan. So we've done a lot of grants. You know, we just put in 2 big grants, and we've got 2 other grants that are in the tech stuff. So we've got lots of grants, so we put a guideline on that. Joel helped do some clarification on specific wording. Fiscal policies and principles is kind of the overarching document for all our policies. You can see the rest of the policies I've listed there, kind of just go with it. But I'm going to go through and take a look at the policies, track change form. Little changing on internal auditing. Joel adds some personal time entry, transaction language there. Some of this is just cleanup. All this is aimed at making sure we're in good financial conditions as we continue. This guides Joel and I as we make financial decisions and the way we handle things.
Our auditors look to this as well, as they, more so in future years, they didn't get to do a lot of this year because of COVID. They'll come in mid-year, look at our policies, look at what we're actually doing, and compare those and make sure that we're following our policies. So it's good for us to have those things documented accurately of what we're doing. We're not doing it, change it, or start it.
The bond rating folks also enjoy this type of paperwork.
And this also keeps us in compliance with the Public Funds Investment Act, saying that we're preparing those reports that I give to you all during the financial report and investment report. Keeps us in compliance with the requirements of that book.
Here's the new grant section. Pretty logical. You know, we're doing a lot of grants in aid to help address our current and future priorities and policy objectives. Guidelines is to continue to seek those grants with priority need status. Try to recover any indirect costs that we may have that's allowed, and try to heed those. We'll review all the grant submittals like we do on a regular basis. You know, y'all see the dollar amount. that are fixed, especially our in-kind match. 99% of all grants have an in-kind match. Kenyan has done an outstanding job of maximizing that. You know, a lot of times the in-kind match usually goes from 10 to 25%. You know, we have at times done 50 to 60% in the recent events to make it a worthy project of significant proportion. So we're really doing great on that. But all that comes before you, which ultimately, you know, those grants we do are going to impact the budget. And so we have to look at that while we make those determinations. Because we're putting those in-kind matches, you know, we're creating a accountability on that. We're not trying to use, what's the accounting function of?
We have to budget for that match.
At the budget for it, but it is being purposed, you know, by this body for that match. So when we do the budget, and we will have to equate with those matches are being met for this project if they get funded. So that's a very important aspect. So we wanted to have that language in here to help just continue to provide that guidance. We're already doing this in practice. We just put it in writing. So we're already doing this in practice. Other than that, I think that's the big section that was changed there. Yep, that's it. So, other than some minor little one word fix there, that's the big section. So anybody have any questions on those? I don't think we really use time. So, Joel, did you have anything else to add? We'll need a, if y'all are comfortable with being that the changes weren't significant, Commission, we would like to recommend a motion to accept the modified revised policy.
Go ahead, that's resolution 22-2021.
Yes, sir.
I move we adopt resolution 22-2021 for the amendment of the City of Kenyan fiscal principles and policies.
Have a motion and second. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate you getting in. All right. That takes us to item number 10. Consider and take appropriate action on resolution number 23-2021. A resolution of the City Commission of the City of Kenyan, Texas, amending the City of Kenyan's comprehensive fund balance and cash reserve policy.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, this one has a little bit more change. Fund balance is an interesting topic, and so there's several ways to talk about it. Fund balance has multiple assets defined in its regulatory aspect. Ultimately, what we're doing in our fund balance policy is only secluding it down to one asset, and that's cash. And so Joel and I were in complete agreement. We wanted to make it look a little more that when we're talking reserve and fund balance, that's our cash. That is a cash asset. And so ultimately, assets, roads, cash receivables,
Go ahead and clarify, because it actually speaks to both. It speaks to fund balance and to reserve cash reserves. This policy does. Fund balance is more of a financial statement, balance sheet. It's what's left after you take your assets and subtract your liabilities, your equity. And so this policy addresses how we're going to designate or reserve certain components of that fund balance. We're required to do that in accordance with government accounting standards for certain things, such as prepaid assets, investment in infrastructure and capital assets that has to have a fund balance reservation. But Joe's right, in the component of the assets that we can control and spend, that's cash. So there's a separate part of this that has to do with cash reserves. And it's in this policy that we're defining what we're going to keep in reserves. A certain percentage of our general fund budget and a certain percentage of the utility fund budget. And that's what I report on. When I give you that investment report, you'll see that here. This just kind of sets the fences for how we're going to operate and keep us stable financially.
Thank you, Joel. And so we've done quite a bit of change in here. And Joel, we'll go into that here in a second. But just like Joel said, we're really trying to identify that cash reserve aspect. On a noteworthy basis, ultimately we need to look at what that cash reserve basis is at the end of the fiscal year. In our minds, from Joel and I's perspective, that's the most important one to look at. Now, Joel and staff look at it on a monthly basis like we've been doing, but there are times in the year when we are going to be a little more flush with revenue than we are. And so right when property taxes come in, they all come in November, December, by February, maybe early March, all those are in. So we're going to have quite a bit of revenue, but not as many expenses at that point, because that all comes in as a whole. For water revenue in the utility fund, a big portion of it comes in the summer, and so it may operate loss until the summer comes, where those revenues spike due to weather and temperature. So at any time of the year, if you're taking a snapshot at that cash reserve could be different because we're getting a load of cash or revenue at significant times. So right now, revenues are a little higher because we've gotten all that in, and we haven't even gotten into water technically. So that's why I said it's most important looking at it at the end of the fiscal year to get the snapshot, and that's what we use. But we'll still look at it every 5 months. So just to clarify on that aspect. And I want to tell you, I mentioned it to Gary, we are in a very good place right now, and so I am tickled to death. And Joel and I are smiling. When we set out to do this policy about, this is our first time to review it, so it's been 12 months since we did this. We established this policy. Mid-COVID. One of the things that the city commission and city management wanted to do, we wanted to have an actual balance of cash reserve and what it was. And so we set parameters for a minimum and a maximum, as y'all recall. And so Joel and I were looking at it earlier this week, and we are at the maximum today. Actually more than the maximum. Part of that is because we received $900,000 in Corona Relief Fund for payment back of public safety salaries. Yeah, we'll get to there on the finances here in a second. But
so with the policy then, the category, the general utility fund, CIP fund balance. So as we have a balance in there, and once we get to our CIP, that's what we'll use to fund those purchases.
Right.
Is that right?
Correct. There will be 2 ways we fund. So that's why I went on about the end of the year. Because at the end of the year, Joel and I will take a look at what is left, and typically we'll have a surplus of dollars. Most of the time, that's how it happens. We'll take those and we'll allocate those to the categories. That could go to the equipment fund. It could go to CIP. It could go to debt payments. There's select categories that's predefined by the commission in here, giving staff direction. And I'll go down to that. The categories. Thank you. Here's the categories it can go to, Gary. Long-term accrued liabilities, OPEB, things like that, to help lower that. That's one that's very much a big fluctuation for Joel. Lowering the amount of bond or debt service payments. Increase the pay-as-you-go contributions needed for the capital improvement program. That's number 3. 4, increase contributions in the fund for the equipment fund equipment. One-time expenditures that don't have reoccurring operating costs, or startup expenditures for new programs. Those are the 6 categories that we can put it into. So we've not put it into anything since this has been established, because we were working our way up to get to, we thought we were going to get to the middle of but we've actually reached the max. And so we'll go into that here in a little bit more. But yes, does that answer your question, Gary? And Joel and I, that's why Joel and I will look at it at the end of the year. There will also be projects in the budget that we do fund with the CIP, and we're doing that now. And so right now, I can name 2 projects. We're going to do a street expansion of 18th Street. We're funding one part of it this year, and then one part of it next year. And so at the end of the year, Joel will move those funds over to the CIP that we'll create before the year is out, the fund. And then next year we'll move it over as well. The other one we're working on is the forced main to the sewer plant. We've got $400,000 in cash on hand that's being, and then we'll continue. We need to get to 1.2. So we are having projects in the budget as well, Gary, that will fund projects as we go along the way. So there'll be two aspects that we're doing CIP. Sorry if I got long-winded. Changes in cash reserves there, you can see. I'll go through this as short as I can. I know you don't want a lot of time on it. Here's kind of what Joel was mentioning, the definition change. City of Kenyan will determine the cash reserve using a modified accrual basis whereby cash reserves represent the net cash available after all revenues have been received and deposited and all incurred expenses. Commitments have been paid. For example, like if you check back up.
What difference does it make? Changing that definition?
It just makes it a little more accurate of what our reserves are.
So we can't really talk about what cash reserves are throughout the year?
We can, yeah, we can.
This won't be, this right definition?
No.
And that's what I report to you every time I give you that cash reserve.
We're making it a more concise statement of what is cash reserve. What is I say cash reserves, what does that mean to the layperson?
But before we didn't have cash, and we just talked about reserves.
Okay.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. We just want to.
I'm understanding right too. You're saying our cash reserves are going to look better right after we receive our tax revenues. We haven't been hit with a lot of operating expenses. So as we move down into the year, those will drop. But then summer and water bills also help them to
Typically what it looks like is, up until about right now, the general fund can fund itself. And it's got plenty of cash from collection of property taxes. From here on, I'll start having to move cash transfers, the budget to, we'll have to move cash from the utility fund, because we'll have an excess of cash over here from water revenues. And we'll have to move that over to the general fund to fund those monthly expenditures, which in the general fund, those are fairly consistent throughout the year, other than the street, seal coating, operations of the cap. Those kind of go up in the summertime. But we'll have to have some help for the utility fund to fund those expenditures from here on to the end of this year.
Joel put in here enterprise fund CIP. So what we're planning on doing fund-wise with the capital improvement plan, we'll have a general capital improvement fund, and then we'll have a enterprise fund. The enterprise fund will house the water and wastewater and the golf course, and so all three will be in that fund because they're both enterprise functionality. So we didn't have the enterprise fund in here this last year, so we're adding that. And Joel's probably going to go ahead and set those funds up in the next 2 months, probably before the end of the fiscal year. And then we'll probably go ahead and move some of this excess cash over to you guys. So he created the definition of that on the enterprise fund. You can see it there at the top. So this, what wouldn't be coming out of there? Street projects wouldn't come out of there. Building facilities for the police department wouldn't come out of there. Things like that. Drainage projects wouldn't come out of there. Water, sewer, and golf. Our new golf irrigation system would come out of that project. Amen. Sorry, I had to get that in there. I think that's it. Here's our cash, guys, at the end. These numbers updated, Joel? Yes. So these. Those look
percentage on our current budget.
Okay.
So that's defining
I thought it was
minimum and maximum.
I thought it was at 6.1.
No, this is the parameters based on the budget. This isn't where the balance is actually on.
Well, I know, but I thought
This is the policy.
I thought the max was 6.1.
Thinking actual?
No, hang on. No, I was thinking the actual policy was more than that. Hold on here. Is that agenda item 12 or not? Yeah, here this one says 6.4. There must be a typo on the policy. You see it, I've got it on the screen, Joel. That's the one for the investment.
Yeah, that's.
The other one said 5.8. I think there's a typo there, you guys. This is the one we're going about. So here's your answer to your question, Paul. Joe will go over this in a minute. So our minimum 25% in general fund, minimum 15% utility fund, minimum 50% in the debt service. Debt service has no max. That one's kind of out of our hands.
Actually, that table was last year's, that's 2020 budget.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
we need to update that for 2021.
Yeah, that's another one. So maximum is 6.4 on the other side, 35% on general fund, 25% on utility fund. And you can see on the far right, that's our actual. You got to deduct the 386 out. The 386,451 has to be deducted out of the total reserve balance of 7.668 because that one doesn't really come into it. So you're looking at we're about 7.15, 7.2 right now. And you can see how that compares to 6.4. And so a lot of that's the $900,000 that we received from the federal government on CRA. Criminal release fund. Like I said, you guys, I'm ecstatic to death. We've been able to come back in 5 years' time to get back up here. So ultimately, we're going to probably pool the excess. We'll wait until the end of the year. So we'll leave it in there until the end of the year. But then we'll put it in the CIP fund. If we need to pay on some extra debt or whatever.
So right now, this chart doesn't have the CIP, but once we get there, this chart will start having that CIP category on it.
Yeah, we'll have, Joel's probably going to do project accounting for the CIP, and he and I have started that discussion, the internal aspect of that, and you'll see that being funded throughout the years. Ultimately, the CIP budget will be a part of our annual budget process. That'll be probably the first part. You'll look every year at the capital improvement budget every year to see what it's at, because you got to know what's being funded that year.
And we'll add that to the report so you'll see what that cash balance is, like all the others.
That's right. So, amen, you guys. Thankfully, we're blessed right now.
I move to approve 23-2021, amending of the City of Kenyan Comprehensive Fund Balance Reserve.
Second. Have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All in favor of the motion signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Okay, that takes us to item number 11. Consider and take appropriate action on contract for Randall County to assess and collect ad valorem taxes for the City of Kenyan. Joe?
If you recall, it hasn't been that long since we brought this agreement to you. I received a call a couple months ago from Christina Murray, the tax assessor collector for Randall County. And she's asked us to go ahead and update this contract so that it is signed by Judge Dyer, Christy Dyer, as the current county judge. That's the only change in this report. There's no change in any of the wording. So I told her we could take care of that. the reason for presenting this to you at this time.
I'll move that we approve the contract between the City of Canyon and Randall County for Randall County Tax Assessor Collector to assess and collect and the warrant taxes for the city.
Second.
Got a motion and second. Is there any discussion? All in favor of the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. All right, item number 12, consider and take appropriate action on March 31st, 2021 financial report by Finance Director Joel Wright. Joel?
So this is what we've just been talking about in policies. This is the real thing. So this is the financial statements as of March 31. First, be the balance sheet for the general fund. You see our cash and cash equivalents is at $3.8 million. As Joe's already mentioned, this is at the peak of our year, at the time of the year for the collections on property taxes. And also included in that $3.8 million is about $892,000 grant funding that we received for the Corona Relief Fund, and also the CSF fund. I can't remember offhand what that stands for, but that was the initial grant that we got in on with Randall County for some specific purchases of PP&E and other things that were specific to the COVID response. We just got that money in about January, February from Randall County. So that's included in that cash total. At this point in time, our investments was about $984,000. That includes, well, it's all certificates of deposit. Cash and cash equivalents includes our ICS account. And the certificates of deposit is the only thing that we have tied up in top of the investment. So those are mostly 6-month investment, 6-month CDs, some of them 12-month. None of them pay very good interest, so that's just where we're at right now in every company. We'll see that a little bit later in the investment report. Total assets, $7.2 million, and that's up quite a bit even from the end of September of fiscal year. Total liabilities, about $137,000, and the net of that is an ending fund balance of $6.8 million. Again, almost $2 million higher than the fund balance overall at the end of the fiscal year.
What's that difference in the due from other governments?
That would be the timing of what we're collecting. So due from other governments is going to include what we were getting in those grants. Okay. So we had that set up as a receivable at the end of the fiscal year, $660,000 on that CRF grant.
Gotcha.
And we've since received that, so that's now in the cash balance. If there's no more questions on the balance sheet, I'll go ahead and go to the schedule of revenues and expenditures for the general fund. So here you can see where we're at on the revenue in the way of taxes, property taxes for $2.9 million. Just a little bit ahead of budget on that. And I've changed this report a little bit. I will explain this. In the past, I was doing an allocation of the budget for 6 months. I'd be showing you half of the budget. I'm going and showing you the whole budget on this report and giving you the amount of budget that's remaining and the percent of the budget remaining. And this is consistent with our internal reports that we look at the department. Just want to be consistent in how we're presenting that internally and also to you. So when you see, like for instance on sales tax, if you see a negative there, that's just meaning that for the remainder of the year we'll be collecting that $956,000. At this point in time of the year, we've only collected $1.5 million in years total. We still have $956,000. It doesn't mean that we're below budget at this point in time. It just means what's left to collect on the budget. change on that line item. Present this to you every month or every time as well. Scheduled sales tax collections, we've got, working on a 4-year trend for this, so you can see total collected back in 2017, 2018 was a little over $3 million. 2019, 2020, the last fiscal year, we collected $3.4 million. And this year, 6 months through, we've already collected a little over $2 million. So we're on track for that to continue.
$2 million in 6 months. So
it's about a 3% increase each year, 3 to 5% increase.
We're 23 to 25% up in sales tax compared to budget.
So after we transfer the CED's portion of that, the city has $1.5 million of sales tax there. That's where we're at, halfway through. Other line items, overall, we're a little over $6.9 million in revenues. This does include on the grants and donations line, $328,000. That's the remainder of that CRF grant that we received. And again, as Joe mentioned, that was reimbursement for police and fire protection salaries. So we matched that revenue with the expenditures and tried to keep those so that we stay out of single audit requirement, which is a little bit more intensive and time-consuming audit engagement. Fortunately, we were able to kind of plan what we were submitting for reimbursement, so we kept that split between the 2 fiscal years.
Assume when CRF or the CARES Act hits, we will have to do probably two single audits.
Unless they get an exception.
Unless they do an exception, more than likely.
We'll have to get one.
2 single audits.
A single audit is just it's a lot higher volume of work that the outside accounting firm has to perform on that audit. We look at a lot more detail in the way of policies and procedures and a lot more checklists and a lot more documentation on their part. So it's a lot higher audit fee and a lot more time involved.
Only associated with those funds or those accounts, or is it across the board, just like a regular audit?
Overall, it looks at your entire accounting system. But as far as the test work, it would be specific to those grant funds.
Okay.
That qualifies with $750,000 of federal funds. So if we get over that, which we're on the pace to be 1.7 million per year.
We may exceed that anyway if we get some of these other grants. Those are all federal funding.
So it's cumulative on that.
Yeah, it's cumulative. It's not one time. So we get Tech Stock grant, and we get American Rescue Plan money. It's all adds up.
Kelsey, you leaving because you're not getting paid yet, or what?
I won't be doing this anymore, but until I bought 6, so every time I'll get it right.
We do give each other a hard time around here.
See you next week. I'll tell you when to see you. I don't have time.
Go ahead, Joe. You go.
Financial stuff's not exciting.
So, send our new commissioner running out.
Over the tears. Go ahead and go to expenditures. Just kind of go through that real quick. We ought to be at about 50%. We're at 6 months through the year. So you can see there we're around 50% on most things. Streets, of course, the big piece in that budget is the seal coating, so we're way below budget on that at this point in time, but here in a couple months we'll get back on track. So overall, net increase in fund balance in the general fund is $1.9 million at this point in time. And again, just to say it again, the contributing factor for that is the collection of property tax, sales tax, and this premium. questions on the general fund? Okay, briefly, I'll just go through the debt service fund. Again, this is the piece of the tax rate that we collect just for paying the bond issue for the cap. So we collected we're at a cash balance of $386,000 at this point in time. We've collected $443,000 of that part of the property tax, and we have expended principal payment of $245,000 and interest and fiscal charges of $70,350. We'll have one more payment of $66,000 coming up in August for interest on that bond issue. That leaves us with an increase in debt service fund of $129,000 at this point. Following that is the balance sheet on the water and sewer fund, which is an enterprise fund. Cash balance there is pretty steady. It's dropped some since the end of the fiscal year, just a little over $3.5 million. And as we discussed, that cash will increase some here as we go into the summer, especially if it doesn't start raining. We have restricted cash of $184,000. Just briefly, that's what's left of the 2012 COs. That's being spent down on Fifth Avenue water line project. I expect that to disappear pretty soon. Receivables is mainly water utility revenue receivables. Overall current assets are a little over $5 million. We have $47,689,000 invested in assets. Liabilities, $1.3 million. And that leaves us with a net position of $40,281,000. $37 million of which is invested in capital assets. So we have an unrestricted net position of $2.8 million in water and sewer fund. Looking at the schedule of revenues and expenditures, water sales, we're at $2.7 million, which is about right, a little below 50% for the year. Likewise with sewer penalties is specific to Lone Star. We did budget for that. We have been seeing improvement in their situation, so the surcharge that we collect from them has been declining. However, we'll probably continue to see that penalty just based on the agreement and whether or not they can comply with that. And just to remind you, we'll see this again here in the next report, but we collect that penalty, but we have that agreement that if they meet their required ratios on help me with the terminology.
Compliance, wastewater compliance.
Yeah. So if they meet those after installing all of their improvements, we'll be returning that money to them. And that's being tracked as a contingent liability on the balance sheet. $456,000 is where we're at this point in time. So, however, we do include that here as revenue as we collect it. Expenditure-wise, we're tracking pretty well. It should be about 50% of this line items depending on time. So we're not out of line with any budget line items on expenditures. Overall, we have a net increase at this point in time of $447,000 in water and sewer. And again, I expect that to increase as we go through the summer months. Any questions on the water and sewer fund sheet or revenues and stay around 50 to 60,000. It gets up to about 100,000, I'll go ahead and transfer, reimburse the general fund. Our general fund pays for most expenses out of its bank account. The other funds reimburse, so I'm trying to keep that reimbursed as the golf collects cash, and the cash collections are increasing as we go into the summer months. Total liabilities, a little over 900,000. Gives us a net position, still a deficit, overall 805,000. Most of which is just an accumulation over the years, but we are continuing to pay that down each fiscal year, trying to
That'll decrease in the summer because of increased play, obviously.
It will, and all others operating expenses increase as well. But we continue to try to pay down the balance of what the golf fund owes to the other funds. And that's actually down to 709,000 as of March 31. And then just briefly, the operating schedule of revenues and expenditures. As of March 31, total revenues of 370,000, expenses of 637,000, leaving a loss of 266,000. And then we've gone ahead and transferred cash to their budgeted transfer of 420,000. So that results in a net increase in net position of 153,000. As far as the financial report, that's all I have to present on that.
Make a motion to approve the quarterly financial report.
Second. We have a motion second to approve the quarterly financial report. All in favor of the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. Motion passes. Thank you, Joel, and appreciate you digging into it. So I appreciate your diligence. It's helpful and hopefully continues to be kind of an education for a lot of us. Thank you.
And anytime you've got a question in between meetings, give me a call and I'll try to answer it if there's something concerned about. I'm curious.
Thank you. Then that takes us to item number 13, consider and take appropriate action on March 31st, 2021 investment report by Finance Director Joel Wright.
Okay, so this is, again, we talked about this in the policies, but two components to this report. Schedule of cash and cash equivalents, and also the schedule of secured deposits. First part of this is just kind of telling you this is where we have cash invested or deposited. So this reports to you all of our bank accounts, our insured cash sweep accounts at this point in time. Again, as I mentioned before, general fund, we have some money in certificates of deposit. Other than that, most of our cash is in insured cash sweep accounts. Overall, we have $4.8 million in cash at this point in time in the general fund. Debt service fund, $386,000. Water and sewer fund, $3.5 million. And restricted cash of $184,000. And golf fund, $64,000. Page 2 of that report, we also add in the capital equipment fund, $254,000 at this point in time. So overall, we have total cash and cash equivalents of $9.2 million. And we subtract from that things that we know we're committed to. Capital equipment fund, of course, is for specific purpose. We're going to buy capital equipment with that $254,000. We know we've got $250,000 left on paying for some of the components that are due on the AMI project. As I mentioned before, we owe $798,000 to Lone Star for that penalty. We're going to go ahead and segregating that, assuming they're going to meet their requirements earlier, the CIP project for funding force main for the sewer line out to the wastewater.
On the 7th, it's about a $1.2 million project.
So we're going ahead and setting that aside. We'll actually physically move that to a CIP bank account when we set that fund up. We also have restricted cash, debt service cash. We can only spend that on debt service, so $386,000. And as I mentioned earlier, the restricted cash that's left for the CO certificates. So that leaves us with $6.9 million that we can spend. As we've been talking about, we're internally set these reserve expenses. So we've got a minimum of $2.9 million for the general fund, and $1.3 million for the utility fund. And that's just a percentage of our budgeted expenditures. Maximum of $4.1 million for the general fund, and $2.2 million for the utility fund. That's our parameters. Where we're at is, in actuality, is $4.8 million for the general fund. So, as Joe mentioned, we're beyond the maximum, and we're at $2.8 million for the utility fund. Again, beyond the maximum.
We cannot touch the 386. So we just
Yeah, that's debt service
on the cap. So it can't be touched, but it's cash on. It's cash we have in the bank.
So as Joe mentioned, at the end of the year, we'll track this throughout the year. Say we ended up the end of the fiscal year with something comparable to this, we'd be looking at moving, say, $700,000 from the general fund to the general fund CIP fund, and around, say, $600,000, $550,000 to $600,000 for the utility fund to utility fund CIP, or one of those other opportunities, I guess, or options, I should say options, that are provided for in that policy. That just kind of gives you an idea of how we're watching this and kind of how we're looking ahead, looking at the needs and seeing how we can best use the cash.
Bill, I don't know if I need to ask this question, but what's the difference between the 6.9 million, 932, and then, I guess, the 7,668,000?
Right. The 7,668 is total. That's total cash reserve, less the restricted. So I've also got in here is the 250. And that 7.6 million would include the 254,000. That's capital equipment fund. We don't. That's not spendable for because we've already segregated that, so we're just going to use that on the capital equipment. And then as Joe mentioned, it also includes the $386,000 debt service. We can't touch that for anything in the service. The only thing we can do on that $386,000, we can take that into consideration when we're budgeting for next year. When we're budgeting for the debt service. Or we can leave that in there and let it keep growing, and we'll just pay that debt off early using the excess cash. The other part of this report is the schedule of secured deposits. And as I kind of mentioned during the presentation of policies, this is specifically required by the Public Funds Investment Act. We're required to be sure that the bank has our deposits secured. So
will the depository be on the agenda next week?
No, probably not quite time. We will have $250,000 of FDIC insurance, but of course that's for us. That's specific to tax ID number, so that doesn't cover very much. So therefore, the bank has to pledge securities to secure our deposits. So that's the purpose of this report, is to show you that is being done. So this is going to report cash balance. Before, what I've shown you is our book balance of cash. This is actually what's on the bank statements at March 31st. So we have deposits of $2.5 million. The bank had pledged securities with a market value of $10.6 million as of March 31. And I included a report that we get from the bank, which shows you the securities that they have pledged and the market value of those securities as of March 31. So, in conclusion on that, we are adequately secured by the bank on our cash deposits. Do you have any questions on the investment report?
Things looking good, you guys.
I make a motion we approve.
Have a motion and second. All in favor of the motion, signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, like sign. The motion passes. Thank you, Joe. Sure appreciate it. With that, that takes us to item number 14, initial budget discussion for 2021-2022. Presentation of budget calendar. Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Got the agenda in front of you. It's already that time of year. We're looking at the budget for next year. I could operate this machine correctly. Got some items in there. We're gonna, some of the highlights. We're gonna use the same format. I have turned some of this over to Joel to be the lead on this year. He is working on implementing Excel spreadsheets with the document. We weren't able to do that last year. We have a little more time this year to do it. We'll have some new items to add to improve and keep the GFOA best practices. I've included that brief listing in here, and I've assigned those out. Got the budget calendar worked up, and I've talked a little bit about the internal budget structure. Joel will be the main lead with myself, and John's going to come in. He's going to help calculate all the unfunded items that Cody mentioned last year. Cody wanted to make sure we listed all the unfunded items that we didn't fund last year as well. John will be focused on the one-time purchases and capital improvements. We'll be working on the big ticket items with Joel and I. Joel and I'll be doing a lot of this stuff, the rest of it. We've already sent out internally to staff to start working on their goals and their objectives. So John sent that out on my behalf. That went out last week, right, John? Yeah. Here's our calendar to get on y'all's radar for what we're looking at. Goals and objective settings is kind of where we're at right now. That phase that's ongoing right now. We'll look at some of that. Probably I'll sit down with Gary to look at the mayor and commission's goals and objectives. If anybody else wants to join, please let me know. I'll send that out. And then we'll move on in late May to the financial phase between May and August, and we'll have some time to kill in the summer months and stuff. Hopefully, like last year, I'm going to try to get the budget filed by July 30th. Be on official file with the city secretary per local government code. We have gotten our first values. Appraisals did go up. I think, what was the average, 7%? Is that what you saw? I think it's 7%. 5%. Yeah.
I've looked at it a couple different ways. The average home was like 7%, maybe, and the total was 5%.
Potential August 2nd budget council meeting if we want to. It's optional, and same thing with July 19th if you want to. I'm trying to start the budget a little earlier this year to get it going. We made a lot of headway last year. There was a lot of hundreds of hours put in last year by Joel and myself and other staff members to get the budget up and running. Then with the adoption phase, most of this is legal. We have to post all the tax rate notifications. August 16th, commission meeting, receive the budget and schedule public hearing, discuss the tax rate, take record votes, put on the agenda. Deadline for election, we got to that. Deadline to adopt the tax rate on the 23rd, public notices on the 20th. Another commission meeting on the 6th, to conduct a public hearing on the budget and take vote on the budget. And then September 20th to another commission meeting to conduct a public hearing for those tax rates. It's kind of the calendar and timeline. Anybody want to look at anything specific on the calendar? Same calendar as last year, same format. Not much difference between last year and this year. Some of the new budget items that we've had, like I said, Joel's working on the new Microsoft Word document to make it better. That is, I know it's not significant, but it does take quite a bit of work. So there is a lot of lifting in that. Joel's already, I think you're already underway on that, are you not? So there's a lot of lifting on that. I've got a fund analysis section we're going to look at, kind of analyzing each fund. Joel and I are going to work on that. Megan's got a new camera. She's going to help us get a really nice budget cover sheet. So we'll have a new budget cover page representing Kenyan. Her and Gretchen are working on that. I mentioned already, John is going to do an internal item of unpublished, be an unpublished but unfunded item from previous budget, so y'all can take a look at that this coming year. I've already done some of this. Danny and I are working on population trends. Y'all seen some of that with the fire department discussions. Danny and I are going to continue to look at that trend. I've asked him to help me with that. He does a lot of our demographics and statistics, so I've asked him to help in that. We're going to try to include utility accounts in there too. Take a look at our increase, because that's one thing we overlook. We've had a lot of utility increase accounts just by number. Megan and Joel are going to help me. We're going to have a quick, dirty, short top 10 list. If John Smith was going to open the budget, what's one thing he wants to see? If he wants to see the tax rate, well, it's going to be probably on the top 10. What's our overall expenses? That's number 2 on the top 10. So kind of the top 10 priority list that people want to know by looking at the budget. So there'll be a short, quick sheet for people to go and take a look at, so they don't have to go through the whole budget. Those popular questions, those popular things that people want to know. We're going to have a financial table. We just went through our policies. We're just going to list all the financial policies in there that we have at the City of Kenyan, and we just went over those. So that's just a list of those. We'll have a sheet that has a summary of changes between the proposed budget that we'll submit and what was actually adopted. So hypothetically, if Cody, we had a police car in there, and you decided you didn't want the police to have a police car, and you cut it between the proposed and adopted budget, that's what would be on that sheet.
That's proposed to this commission or proposed?
So when I submit the budget to Gretchen to file, that's a proposed budget.
Okay.
And so what changes from there to the adopted budget, what y'all cut or what we cut along the way, those things would be addressed. Or add to. Add to could be also in there too. So, you laughing down there at me? One of the things Gary and I have talked a lot about is, we really want to get our credit rating back up. We did take a hit, which a lot of the Panhandle cities did, so it was not uncharacteristic. And their biggest thing was the economy. Slipping economy, whatever that is. And so, one thing we're putting in there, and Joel and I have talked about this, is we're taking Standard & Poor's credit rating, and we're showing what their top 10 management characteristics are, and we're putting how the City of Kenyan is matching that, and how we're meeting that requirement. And so we'll have a sheet in there showing that to help improve our credit rating.
That's a great system and noticing that.
Yes. Yeah. Just show that we're meeting all those characteristics. And then kind of Joel mentioned this earlier about the balanced budget and fund balance, and so we'll have a definition in there about the balanced budget. So those are the ones that are definitely going to be new items. These aren't ones that carried over from last year. There's some other new items, but Joel has discretion from my authority to nix these or get around to them if he can. And so this is kind of a short list. We really need to look at robusting our long-range financial planning. That's typically 10 years out. We've not done a lot of that in historical. We're trying to get to that of what our revenue projections are going to be over the next 10 years. Joel's got that on the short list. I'm not sure that's a big order. I'm not sure that's going to make it. One thing we have struggles with, a budget development page, short-term factors that are impacting the overall budget. One of the pensions that we have to deal with on the page in retirement, those really impact it, or rising healthcare costs. Healthcare is on the rise significantly. So if we were to get a 10% increase in healthcare costs, well, that's going to make an overall impact on our budget. And so we need to look at those short-term impacts on the overall budget. Or if we were in a situation where we're going to have a significant drop in sales tax, or like we talked about in hot tax, well, those are another short-term factor that we need to look at. and we need to look at those mitigating future challenges on how we're going to address those in the coming year. Thankfully, we've been on the good side with the sales tax where it's been going up, where some communities are not on the good side and it's going down. And so that would be something to look at. Megan's going to help me with number 4. I think we're going to be able to get number 4. Basically, we want to do a where does your property tax go page. And so from one end to the other, you're going to have, obviously, you're going to have Kenyan ISD, City of Kenyan, Randall County, and then the baby piece for the hospital district, and a little piece for the water district. So we're going to show where all your taxes go in Randall County, and it just shows what our portion is. So we're going to try to do that. And then we're going to try to do comparison between budget and financial reporting, and Joel actually got into that. Some items that we're lacking is a strategic plan. That is a requirement for GFOA. We've got some of that now, the Kenyan CIP and the long-term financial plan. So that's the big ones on the radar. We won't be able to get to the Kenyan strategic plan until later into the fall, unfortunately, due to just schedules, Joe having a baby and everything else in life. And so it's on the agenda to do, to move forward. The Kenyan CIP is in the works. I have started that program. I am a third of the way through it. I've got a little bit of early feedback from Joel and John on some pointers. And so I should get that. I'm in the ranking system, and so how we're going to rank projects. That's what I'm working on now. It'll probably take me another 8 to 12, 14 hours to get that finished up. I've sent a few of y'all some of the early listing of projects. Dwight has been gracious enough to give me a list of his projects. I still need to sit down with staff. I still need to do facility added projects, and I still need to do expansion system projects. Everything we've got now, I think, Dwight, is mostly just rehabilitation and replacement. Is that correct? Yes. It does not take any expansion of the system. I do think that needs to be a factor that will be a weighted aspect in the ranking. But that's it, you guys. Do y'all have any questions on the budget? So we're getting ready to gear up for that and get working on it. I'm excited. Maybe nerdy, but
We never say that.
thank you, sir. Is there anything I've tried to start early this year, you guys? Is there anything you want me to throw out that I haven't put out so far, or something you don't want me to forget about? I know with the big one's CIP, and we're going to move forward. I'm hoping the CIP will be done by the end of the fiscal year. We won't be able to do it with the budget as much. We will talk capital improvements for next year's budget. That will be inevitable, and John will lead those efforts with us. Yeah, but the CIP program won't be done probably until late August or late September. Is what I'm anticipating. So
I've started those Excel documents on the CIP as far as bringing in the facilities and all the other things that were on our previous list, and breaking those down by department. So you'll be able to look at each department separately, and it'll all come together, and you'll see everything we're looking for.
Yep. It'll be a big list. Any other thoughts?
So I think that's a great start. I mean, transparency for the public, but then just also information for us. That, I think this was stuff we haven't done in the past.
It's all about planning. I think that's what we're able to show.
Yeah. We're just trying to do good at planning, and Joel's got a year under his belt and a little more seasoned, and so we're getting there. Can't do it alone. We all do it as a team. That's all I got, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for the kind comment.
All right, that takes us to number 15, exec session pursuant to 551.071, consultation with attorney, and 551.072, deliberations about real property. And looks like it is about 6:02, and we'll retire to executive.
Y'all want to take a quick break? I think it'll only take 23 minutes at most. You guys? I think we'll be done by 6:30. I need to go use the restroom. We can take a break. We're supposed to. 30% of 7.
I heard you will see.
No, I'm still there. This is out.
Well, I won't go to Linda's Facebook page.
Let you got the memo today, Joel?
Facebook.
CC.